This video is all about supply side policy. So supply side policy aims to increase the productive potential of the economy. What do we mean by that? Well, remember this production possibility frontier or production possibility curve? The curved red line shows us the maximum that we can produce in our economy if we use all of our resources, all of our factors of production, and we use them all in the most efficient way. The red line shows us the maximum we can produce. The only way we can produce more in our economy than that is by increasing the resources we have, increasing the quantity of our factors of production or increasing the quality of those factors of production. And remember, factors of production are land, labour, capital and enterprise. So if we can increase either the quantity of those things or the quality of those things, we can move that production possibility frontier out so that we have the potential to produce more in our economy. Another way of looking at that is that we're pushing the long run aggregate supply curve along to the right. And on this second diagram, you can see that moving the long run aggregate supply curve to the right has the effect of increasing real GDP or output from Y1 to Y2. So if we can either increase the quantity or the quality of resources in our economy, then we have potential to produce more in the long run in a sustainable way and to grow our economy on a more permanent basis. And so this is what supply side policies aim to do. They aim to give us that sustainable long run economic growth. So what are the supply side challenges in the UK economy? Well, here are some of them, and actually many of these are common to many other economies as well. So in the UK, we currently have a persistent productivity gap. What does that mean? Well, it means that we don't seem to be able to produce as much from our resources as some of our competitor countries. And we're not always sure exactly why that is. We quite frequently have high youth unemployment. And again, this is common to many developed nations and many developing nations as well. We have a low trend growth of GDP compared to many developing nations. And this is linked to that rise of those emerging nations like China and India and South American nations as well, who are catching up and overtaking and doing all the things really well that we used to do. So how do we continue to compete with those nations? And in our own country, within the UK, how do we tackle those regional economic divides? In the UK, the southeast is a much richer area than the north of the country. And again, that's not an uncommon feature in many economies. Also in the UK, we have a structural trade deficit. That means that we import, the value of our imports is higher than the value of our exports, and that's a problem for us. We also tend to have a low investment in research and development, and we have rising inequality. Now, clearly there are links between some of these things. The question is, how do we solve them? So, supply side policies tend to be applied to those four factors of production that we mentioned earlier: land, labour, capital, and enterprise. So we want to try and make each of these things as efficient as possible: an efficient labour market, an efficient capital market, entrepreneurship made easy and possible for lots of people, competition working well, and education working to improve the quality of the labour in our labour market. So let's think about some practical examples of some of these things. But first of all, just to recap, supply-side policies focus on improving the structural long-term performance of an economy. They can be market-led, in other words, designed to make the market work better and give the private sector more freedom to do what it does really well. Or they can be more focused on state and government intervention in markets to try and overcome some of the different types of market failure that exist. So supply side reforms can affect both the short run and the long run aggregate supply, but the focus is usually on long run aggregate supply because we're trying to really make a long run structural difference to the economy. One thing that we have to remember with supply side policies is that they tend not to work overnight. They're long-term changes, and so the time lags can be long. So some examples. Work incentives and skills. I said that supply side policies aim to increase the quantity and the quality of our resources. Well, if we can get more people into the labour market, that increases the quantity of labour. How can we do that? Well, things like having a higher minimum wage or a living wage. Things like reducing income tax to provide an incentive for more people to work. Things like welfare reforms to ensure that work always pays. And things like giving people the skills that they need in order to come into the workplace, and the skills that they need in the modern workplace, which may be different to the skills they needed 10 or 20 years ago. How about productivity? I mentioned this earlier as a key problem for the UK, that we don't seem to have enough productivity, good enough productivity. And when we think about productivity, we often think of it in terms of, well, how hard are people working? But actually, productivity is about much more than that. Someone with advanced agricultural machinery can grow more on their land than a farmer who just has a shovel. So it's about having the right tools, it's about having the best tools and the best technology, and of course the best trained labour force. And if we put those two together, the better the capital technology, the better trained our labour force, the more productive our resources are going to be. And then there's mobility of labour. It's difficult for businesses to get the best people into the right job if it's difficult for those people to travel around. So it's important that people can travel around and get to different workplaces as the workplace changes, and that means a good, efficient, effective and affordable public transport service. And it also means ensuring that people can actually move around the country on a more permanent basis. So improving the geographical mobility. So having enough houses at affordable price so that people can move from one area to another. Currently in the UK, it's very difficult for people to move from the north of England, where there are not so many jobs, to the south of England, where there are more jobs. It's difficult because house prices in the south of England are very expensive. So you need to make it possible for people to move around, but you also need to have active regional policy to create new jobs in the places where some jobs may have disappeared. Investment is a key issue, and this is where government can often step in. We talked earlier about market failure. So government can invest in research and development itself through universities and so on, but government can also provide incentives to business to invest in research and development, to try and ensure that those businesses remain at the forefront or can get to the forefront of technology and compete effectively with businesses in other countries. And a successful market depends in part on competition working well. In the UK, in common with many countries, we have a government department whose job it is to make sure that businesses are competing fairly. And in the UK, that's called the Competition and Markets Authority. It's intended to give every business a good chance of succeeding in the marketplace. So to try and make sure, again, that businesses in our economy are as competitive as businesses across the world and can compete and succeed in those global markets. And of course, In any successful economy, we need to encourage and support enterprise, and this might be by providing seed funding, the funding that starts a business off in the first place, or it might be by supporting business startups, helping them to plan, helping with their strategy, helping with their research, and so on. So, this is the list. Some of the key concepts to focus on when we're thinking about supply side policies: improving incentives to look for work and investing in people's skills, increasing productivity of labour and capital, increasing the mobility of labour, increasing investment in research and development, promoting competition and supporting businesses to improve their competitiveness, providing that strong platform for sustained non-inflationary growth, encouraging the startup and supporting the startup of new businesses, and thereby improving the trend rate of real growth. And as we said before, if we can succeed in doing all of that, what we hope to achieve is that our long-run aggregate supply curve for our economy will shift to the right, meaning that in the long term, our economy has the potential to produce more and more, thereby growing real GDP on a sustained and long-term level. So, how effective are supply-side policies? Well, they can be very effective, but there are a few things to remember. As we said at the beginning, they can have long time lags. If you want to improve the quality of your workforce, one of the best ways of doing that is to provide education and training, and we know that that can take years and years and years, as can investments in research and development. Sometimes money put into research takes decades to repay. And we can't look at supply-side policies on their own. The level of growth of aggregate demand is also important, and we have looked at that in previous business videos, because of course that demand helps to utilise the extra supply. There is no point in supplying a lot more if no one wants those goods and services that are supplied. The final thing we have to bear in mind, I think, is that some supply-side policies might lead to greater inequalities. So it's about trying to tailor tax policy and so on to ensure that the best result is achieved overall. Okay, we're going to finish there, and now there are a few questions for you.